everyone, and this is the panel for the European Academy of Religion 2020, and the panel that we're presenting today is entitled Freedom for the Oppressed, Christianity, Politics and Issues of Justice. And on the panel today, we have Anna Franco-Ferreira, who is a PhD researcher at the University of Birmingham, and she's researching in social policy and theology. We have Edith Hazir from Charles University in Prague, whose PhD is in modern history, and I'm Selina Stone, a PhD student at the University of Birmingham, researching Pentecostalism and liberation. So we're going to be presenting today in this order, and we'll leave a bit of time towards the end for us to discuss the wider theme of the conference together. So for now, I'm going to hand over to Anna.
Hi, thank you, Selina. Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the overarching context for about the strategic position of religious organizations to create a more just society through power relations and policy making. So in particular, I'm going to be looking at the relationship between churches and the state and how such relationship can develop policies that benefit civil society as a whole. I will start by covering the history and the theology of civil society, and I'll give examples of church and state relationship that led to policy making. I will then finally lay out the current relationship amongst the church, the state and civil society in Britain, and I will raise some inquiries of such connections and point to possible solutions. So civil society as a term was developed in ancient Greece by philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle. For them, those that were eligible and communities had the responsibility to get involved in making society better. Aristotle would argue a virtuous man was in search of a virtuous society. Therefore, it was man's purpose to participate in civic life. The notion of a virtuous society, or as we call today, the good society, is something that has been studied for centuries. The good society is in constant search for the good for all. And although the idea of what constitutes the common good has changed throughout history, the idea that human beings find purpose in the search for the common good and the good society still stands. So what makes good society is not only a philosophical issue, but also a theological one. Within Christianity, the understanding of the good society is an important base of the tradition of social thought. The good society, as explained by Augustine, is the search for the heavenly city. While the heavenly city is found in the love of God and enjoys peace, the earthly city is the city of sin and finds peace by bringing the heavenly city closer together for the search of the common good that is only found in God. In such a way, the value of civil society is to chase the good society through building relationships of sociability and improving the human condition. The value of civil society is not only social, but also eschatological, as theology explanations for the good society gives meaning to the struggle endured in the hope for liberation. Following a comprehensive theological understanding of the search of the good society, there is a question about the mission of the church in that context. In the church's mission, is the church's mission to signpost the good society or to try to shape it? The Apostle Paul says the vision, mission, and the reign of God are intimately linked. Such mission prepares society for the liberation and transformation of humanity through Christ's resurrection. Mission invites and sustains an active participation in God's plan for the liberation of humanity. Now, Christians are called upon and empowered to challenge oppressive structures and establish signs of God's new world. The church has a responsibility to act charitably towards those in need while using its institutional and relational influence to deliver the good society. The church has a mission beyond this world, and while preparing for the core of its mission to tackle social concerns that are unjust is a necessity. This way, the gospel and the social concerns come together in order to create the common good. The church contribution to the search of the good society is seen in the involvement and creation of welfare across the world. Examples are seen in education, health, economy, politics, and many others. In Britain, the close relationship between the church and the state, especially the Church of England, developed a structure where the state church offers guidance, advice to the House of Lords. Although the Church of England influence in politics has reduced over the years, its role and that of other churches and faiths has influenced important policy changes, such as the Act of Relief for the Poor, which were practices that allow the church to care for the vulnerable. This relationship was also fundamental to the establishment of the welfare system in Britain, through the church understandings of social order, human development, and hospitality to the poor. The church has the role to pave the way to be the example and realize its calling as shapers of society. Therefore, they should pursue the common good for all, as democracy needs not only appropriate civic institutions, but also the ones with strong opinions, with the improvement of the human condition at heart. However, it is through the power structures of religion in the form of an institution that churches often make an impact. That way, they demand accountability in the hope to shape policy that improves the human condition. The relationship between church and state has the power to connect social change with the common good and make valuable changes to society. Therefore, an effective response to the deterioration of the common good is needed for the continued pursuit of the good society. Now, I will talk about the church and the state relationship over the last few decades. So the main reason for and I'll be talking a little bit about the change in the position of the church relationship through the time. So there are two main reasons for the change in the position of the church in being able to influence policy. So the first main reason is the decline of religion, especially those of the larger churches. With that, the church began to lose followers and therefore power. However, although there has been a decline of some Christian denominations, there has also been an increase of other churches, especially due to migration. What used to be a small church has now many followers, and they are growing in power. One of the reasons of such a phenomenon is migration, as I mentioned before. That brought different ways to worship and different ways to do church. With the decline of some churches and fragmentations of the church as a cohesive voice, the power of the church to influence policy has been weakened. The second reason for the church change of the church position in being able to influence power is due to the need for the church to provide social welfare. So this started in the 1980s, after the US government announced that the religious organizations were more effective in providing welfare than those of state agencies and secular organizations. The reason for that was due to the experience, geography, and ethos of religious organizations. Following such change in Britain, during Margaret Thatcher's government, there was a call out for citizens to be more active, which resulted in the expansion of the voluntary sector. However, it was within the last few decades, with both the Labour Party and the Conservative Liberal Democrats coalition, that the interest in churches and other religious organizations as partners in social policy grew further. Such interest led churches become an important provider of social welfare that showed a new turn in the position of churches. Whereas before, they would use its power to demand better human conditions, now churches in many places, following the austerity measures imposed by the Conservative Party, are the sole provider of social support. Churches and many other religious organizations are in the forefront of the welfare support, being in many places the only one to provide accommodation for homeless, advice for migrants, food for the unemployed, and many other social provisions. Many churches choose to deliver such social because they see that as part of their mission, while others need the financial support to keep themselves going, and then agree to work with the government in delivering those support. In any case, the stress of support delivery has moved churches away from other core church activities, such as teaching, advising, justice-related work, as well as religious activities, to charitable and service delivery work. Making harder for churches to use their power structures to shape policy. These raise questions regarding the relationship between the church and the state, whether churches are being instrumentalized to deliver on the state's agenda. Religious organizations in general, and churches in particular, should be aware of what this means to them. There is a need to understand the real cost and benefits of being a deliverer of welfare. Now, more and more churches moved on to deliver welfare services. In many ways, they are becoming part of the state rather than acting as a catalyst for tension and social change. Churches and religious organizations are most influential when they have time, energy, and money directed to access policymaking. If churches and religious organizations want to continue to shape society and deliver on the common good, they should consider the position to influence policymaking for the greater good of society. Investigation to understand the possibility for other voices from different denominations and religions are the first step to make religion stronger, to be able to shape policy, and that should be investigated. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, for a really great presentation. I'm going to ask Edis to present now. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So I will be sharing my screen now. Hopefully it will work. So my paper is called Resilience and Religious Belonging of Multicultural and Multinational Encounters in Infidel Izmir. I picked this picture because this part of the city was the Latin Quarter before World War I, but it was destroyed with the fire in Izmir in 1922. So that's why this picture is significant. All right, the focus is the resilience of the multicultural Roman Catholic community of Our Lady of Lourdes of Göztepe against extinction. After the arrival of the priest, Father Gabriel Ferron from France in 2006. The argument advanced is that the resilience of Our Lady of Lourdes is the result of people from different backgrounds moving to Izmir and being part of the parish. So these parishes from different parts of the world were united under their faith and put their differences on the side to save the future of the church in Izmir and set an example for other religious minority groups. The parish is formed by Europeans, Africans, and Turks. I will get back to it, but before, so you can see the church. This is the church, how it looks like. Okay, I will talk about the importance of Smyrna for the Christian world, so we can understand why this church is still important for the Christian world. Okay, Izmir, which is right here, was the best example of cosmopolitanism in the Ottoman Empire in the 20th century. 2 of the 7 churches of Apocalypse, Ephesus and Smyrna, are in Izmir, as well as the tomb of St. John the Apostle and House of the Virgin Mary. So Izmir was also essential for the expansion of Christianity to Europe, as St. Irenaeus, who was a disciple of St. Polycarp, the patron saint of Smyrna, and the disciple of St. John the Apostle himself, sent St. Irenaeus to Europe to spread Christianity. European interest in Smyrna increased the Crusades. The city was taken by the Crusaders in 1344 and was captured back by the Ottomans in 1424 until the Greek invasion in 1919. Capitulations was very important to increase the European interest in Smyrna, which were rights only for the Christians who reside or travel within the Ottoman Empire. So they had like tax exemptions and other benefits. The physical and economic presence of Western Europe was crucial to maintain Smyrnian cosmopolitanism. In the early 20th century, Smyrna was almost like a European city. End of the Belle Epoque. The Belle Epoque is the period mostly after the 1850s until 1922. If you look at the population of Smyrna before World War I, it's 500,000. And there are 320,000 Greeks, 19,000 Jews, 10,000 Armenians, and 2,000 foreigners, as well as 149,000 Turks, who mostly came to Izmir after the Balkan Wars. So this is the picture from the Great Fire of Smyrna, which pretty much ended the Christian superiority over the city. Okay, this is the parish that I'm concentrated on. It's called Notre Dame de Lourdes, a Catholic church in Göztepe. Their main language is French, and the priest is, of course, from France. So this is how it looks during the Mass, which was empty in 2006. The parish of Our Lady of Lourdes was established in Göztepe in the 1900s, and the neighborhood, which was a suburb back then, was mostly populated by Greeks and foreigners, as well as few rich Turkish families. The priest who changed the church and who is the reasons of its resistance, pretty much. That's him. His name is Father Ferron. How did he do this? Okay, so his first action was to learn Turkish, to be able to celebrate the Mass in Turkish as we live in Turkey, which is very important for the Turkish Catholics who spoke neither French nor English. The parish started to revive with the arrival of NATO officers and their families, as there's a big NATO base in Izmir since 1952. The number of masses increased as the people increased, from only one mass on Sunday mornings to 2 masses on Sundays and 2 during weekdays. Father Ferron, he educated himself on the Turkish society to be able to serve the parish better, so he can understand how the Turkish society works. On every occasion, he improved his knowledge on the history of Christianity in Asia Minor and in Western Turkey, so he can teach his parishioners about the rich history of Christianity. This is where the neighborhood is. It's Göztepe. You can see it along the sea. Besides that, he visited the rest of Turkey, all the way to Mount Ararat, which is in eastern Turkey, to see the situation of other Christians in Turkey. So he can, again, tell his parishioners how lucky they are, as Izmir is the most secular city in Turkey. He is also an outgoing person, so he was loved among the Turks within the neighborhood. He also started catechism classes for everyone, for the children, for the Turks, for whoever needs. The result of his hard work was the number of masses which increased, and the number of languages spoken during that mass. Like during their first Christian Christmas Mass, they had almost 11 languages, including African dialects. So, besides the Europeans, the NATO soldiers and their families, there were African students who came to Turkey to study with scholarships. So they were Francophone, so they start being part of the community and they start participating. And Father Ferron, with their help, start the choir. Therefore, in the first Christmas Mass, they had almost 11 languages, including African dialects, Lingala, Songo, and other languages, as well as Latin, French, Turkish, English, and Spanish. And finally, they had an album of hymn in 2017, which was incredible for a small parish. Also, with the priest's help, the parishioners, of course, supported each other and helped the presbytery, volunteered. Besides his work at the church, Father Ferron also hosted the pilgrims who are going to Jerusalem or going to pilgrimage within Turkey. He hosted them with no cost. He had many obstacles. The major ones was the assassinations. The primary one was Luigi Padovese, who was the Vicar Apostolic of Anatolia and president of the Turkish bishops. And there are other priests who were assassinated in Turkey, which was scary for the Christians. And other political issues, such as the Armenian massacres that you cannot really freely discuss in Turkey, as well as other political conflicts between like France and Turkey regarding the Armenian genocide, for example, when France criminalized the denial of the Armenian genocide. Father Ferron in Turkey had a problem and he had to leave Turkey because the Turkish authorities required a work permit that he didn't need until then. So besides that, of course, the Islamization of the country, which was the nightmare of the Christians, kept continuing, and certain churches used as museums were transformed into mosques, which is really dangerous for Christian communities. The Islamization of the country became more tangible in public life. And for example, the convicts of the Zirve publishing house, there was a Christian publishing house, were massacred, and the people who committed the massacre were released after 5 years of imprisonment. The fear of the Christians continued with the ISIS attacks in Europe, as Turkey is a Muslim country, so they didn't really feel secure. And after that, in 2015, we had the coup d'etat, which was very bad for the non-Muslims of Turkey in general, as they start to leave Turkey. Also, the Catholic Church in Izmir experienced difficult times during the refugee crisis, as it was accused of converting Muslim refugees to ease their passage to Europe, even though they were helping them and accommodating them. Of course, the church is constantly facing problems such as theft and pillage, which is common here. But the theft is the least of the problems, as the main problem is political polarization and attacks on human rights. Okay, his hard work was appreciated, as Father Ferron welcomed a Lutheran community who didn't have a place of worship. They came to him, and he opened his church to a Lutheran community, which is almost not acceptable in Europe. Besides that, he was appointed as Episcopal Vicar, which means he was replacing the bishop when the bishop wasn't in Izmir. And there, he was chosen among 13 priests. In October 2018, which is very important, Father Ferron had a presentation of the parish at the annual meeting of worldwide Francophone communities in Prague. And he had a video and picture presentation, and it was a huge success, and it was a good example for the other communities where the Christians experienced difficulties, even threatened. But his biggest success was in 2019, when he received the permission from the authorities in Ankara to celebrate the Saturday Mass in Çeşme, which is very near Izmir, on a Greek cathedral, which was not using. He took the permissions himself. He applied to the authorities so he can serve other communities as well, rather than his community. As the Mass in Çeşme in previous years were celebrated in people's houses. But once we had the problem with the US pastor Andrew Brunson, people were afraid for imprisonment mainly. So he took the responsibility and applied to the town hall himself to get the permission, and it was granted. So he was not just serving his parish, but to the other parishes in Izmir and to the other Christians in Izmir. as a result, there was a Polish priest who came to Turkey in 2017, I believe, and he was appointed to a church in another neighborhood in Izmir, and he followed Father Ferron's example to build his community. And now he has a successful community. I want to show you a small video right now about the community so you can see how it looks like. Yeah, this is the priest, and you can see the Africans and the children. That's all for me. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Edith. It was great to see some pictures as well. That was brilliant. Okay. So I am going to now present my paper, and then we'll have some time for a little bit of discussion afterwards. And so my paper is called Progressive Pentecostalism, Theologies of Power and Practices of Social Change. Pentecostalism is a Christian movement, a Protestant nonconformist movement shaped by very particular theologies, theories and practices of power. In this paper, I will explain how this movement has a history of spiritual power combined with the empowerment of the oppressed. I will present a contemporary example of how progressive Pentecostals in the UK are able to use their spiritual power not only to empower individuals, but to bring about change in the areas of social inequality. Defining Pentecostalism is not easy, as there are so many different types of Pentecostalism and places where it has started. Unlike the Church of England or Roman Catholic Church, there is not an established hierarchical structure to decide what belongs and what does not belong to Pentecostalism. It is called a movement because it is much more like a river which springs up in unexpected places. Pentecostal churches are very young in relation to historic denominations, and so often lack the prestige, history, power and resources that other denominations or churches enjoy. There are huge Pentecostal churches, however, in Brazil, Nigeria, Jamaica, South Korea, England and the USA and many other countries, often appealing in the global south to those in the lower classes and marked by particular ethics and spiritual experiences, which I will describe below. Pentecostal history involves moments in time when the presence of the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God, has been recognized as being present in very profound ways by believers. Whether in the USA, North Korea, Wales, India, or Nigeria, the revivals, as they have been called, were marked by the reporting of supernatural signs and experiences, including miraculous healings, speaking in tongues, a spirit-driven language, and other special spiritual experiences. When the movement is often described, it is often seen in spiritual terms, but it is also true that these revivals were moments of empowerment for the disadvantaged in a more holistic sense. For example, at Azusa Street, the site of the revival in the USA, Black and white people worshipped together in church services, while the wider social and political world was marked by segregation and white violence against Black people. In the congregations, these barriers were initially broken down, even though this was short-lived. And William Seymour, a Black man, led a community where all people were welcomed, attracting the attention of the local press, as well as many international travellers. In Korea, we read about the ways in which the experience of the Spirit's power not only led to miracles, but also to more equality. The revival challenged the colonial status quo, where Koreans were not trusted to lead their own churches. Records show that the Dutch missionaries who were in charge of those native congregations began to recognize that the Spirit was endorsing the Koreans as having the capacity to lead their own churches. In India, another example, a country shaped by the caste system, which characterizes people into classes, the revivals led to a breaking down of divides between the Dalit believers, those in the lowest caste, and the Syrians. The revival resulted in an empowerment of the Dalits in the church congregations when their lives were scorned and undermined in the wider social and political world. Pentecostalism came to the UK through various avenues. The earliest records highlight the Welsh revival of 1904, with many people being converted to the Christian faith and churches bursting at the seams. In addition are the Pentecostal revivals, which were sparked by those individuals like Alexander Boddy and Thomas Ball Barrett, who travelled over to Azusa Street and brought the spiritual practices back to their congregations in England. There have also been later waves of Pentecostal growth in the UK, one of the most notable arriving with the migration of Caribbeans during the Windrush generation from 1948 and throughout the 1950s and 60s. While many of these British citizens were Pentecostals on arrival to British shores, others were Pentecostal by adoption, having experienced racist rejection of the white established churches. There have been subsequent waves of migration from West Africa and other parts of the continent, bringing different indigenous Pentecostalisms to the UK from the 1980s and 90s onwards. In the UK, Pentecostals find themselves in a complex space. As a relatively young movement in Britain, it is often viewed with some uncertainty and even suspicion by those from the established and historic churches. While certain Pentecostal leaders have been welcomed into ecumenical spaces and into dialogue, others have been excluded or seen as a threat due to particular differences in doctrine or practice. Others would also suggest there might be a racial element to these discriminations. The state, likewise, has a long-standing relationship with the Church of England, but views newcomers with caution. However, due to the growth of Pentecostalism, it is recognised as a crucial political, social, and even economic partner for local and national government in many parts of the country. So back to speaking about progressive Pentecostalism. Pentecostalism has often been criticised for being concerned about power only insofar as it relates to the individual life, spiritual matters, or moral concerns. For the otherworldly Pentecostal, the main concern is spirituality and heaven, with the matters of human life in its social and political elements considered to be earthly concerns. However, this is not true of all Pentecostals. And Miller and Yamamori have described what they call progressive Pentecostals as those who see social and political engagement as core to their life and calling in the world. In other words, these Pentecostals are motivated to use their power for the sake of making the world a better place for all people, especially the needy and the vulnerable. Questions of power are essential to this conversation about public theology. where faith and theological ideas make a contribution to life beyond the faith community. This is because when having these discussions, we are reflecting on how religious power engages with other forms of power in society, and particularly those who imagine the church in this case should have no power in political life. I want to use the rest of this paper to discuss what these Pentecostals believe about power from a theological perspective, how they think they can use their power to change the world, and what impact they are having. Progressive Pentecostal engagement in public life is underpinned by a theology of obedience to God, who empowers people by the Holy Spirit to be disciples of Jesus. This empowerment does not come by force, but through people choosing to offer their lives to God in service to Him and others. It is a process of giving up one's own will and power in order to receive the power of God. At the foundation of this is a conviction that God is all-powerful and that the Spirit of God fills believers with the power to do the impossible. This, as we have already noted, is seen in the expectation of the miraculous, but also plays out in the belief that God is one who uses his own power to act in human history in miraculous ways. The story of Moses and the liberation of the slaves in Egypt is one example of where these beliefs arise from. The story demonstrates that the obedience of a person empowered and called by God and the miraculous intervention of God can bring about the impossible in public ways for the sake of justice. The church is recognized as a body of believers, specially empowered by the Holy Spirit to be witnesses in sharing the gospel across the world. This call to witness is not simply about speaking about the message, but living in such a way that people can see something of what Jesus came to bring about. The capacity to live according to the kingdom of God, not the kingdoms of the world, is supposed to set the churches apart as a distinct, holy community of the Spirit. It is this holiness and the power of the Spirit that equips the church to resist the evil powers of the world. The church is empowered to fight against everything which undermines human life, and this includes social and political forces, not simply spiritual ones. The theological framework I have outlined above is the foundation for the theories of change and practices of power which are present within the case studies I have undertaken. There are a range of approaches progressive Pentecostal churches take to change society, and there are different ideas about the kinds of public power Pentecostal churches have and how they should use it. I have devised 3 different models to explain this, and I will emphasize one in particularly. In the church as teacher or motivator model, the church takes responsibility for teaching their congregation why social engagement matters. They operate under the assumption that if they teach and motivate their congregation well, then leaders will arise who will lead initiatives or take on action in their own lives and contexts. In the second model, which I've called church as influencer, the congregation engages in some short-term needs meeting, but is really focused on building relationships with individuals in power. Their strategy is to develop relationships of trust that will allow them to gain influence over the political matters they care about. In the third model, church as connector, the church takes on the role of connecting its congregation members to charities and organisations which are doing work in communities already. This strategy involves sharing and building power with others in the community in order to bring about change both in immediate charity and longer-term change movements such as community organising. I'm going to offer a deeper analysis of the first example, church as teacher motivator. One of the churches that I have done a case study on fits this well. It is led by 2 pastors, both of whom are gifted in teaching the scriptures and motivating their congregations to engage their faith with the reality of human experience. They talked about leading from the centre rather than from the front. So not in a hierarchical manner where they decide on what happens, but in a more collaborative way. Their leaders are involved in a range of community projects, and the church is also, such as a winter shelter for the homeless and pastoral support for families. They have also been a hub for 2 outstanding models of engagement, a local school for primary school children and a project to tackle youth violence. Both of these initiatives were led by individuals who were encouraged to use their skills to benefit the whole of the community, not just the church. So there is also a generosity at the heart of this church's ministry. In both cases, there was a level of social analysis in order to understand that both child poverty, inequalities in education, and youth violence were important features of their life as a community. The leaders of these projects had a very clear sense that God was calling them to address these issues, and they felt no conflicts between involvement in the community and involvement in the church. They had a big imagination for what God might lead them to and what God might empower them to do in society. While policy engagement was not at the forefront of their minds at the school, one of the school leaders did recall a meeting at the Department of Education where she spoke about Christian values. It does not seem that this conversation was geared towards challenge or accountability or justice in education, rather a sole focus on evangelical concerns. On the other hand, in the project on youth violence, those leaders have very strong conversations about where policy changes are necessary in order to improve the systems and the lives of the people they're hoping to serve. There was a level of advocacy present in this project that was absent in the school. I make this point in order to show that Pentecostals have varying ways of engaging with social issues rather than one particular way of doing it. In this paper, I have sought to explain that progressive Pentecostal churches in England exhibit various theories and practices of social change. This is consistent with its history, which had public significance of empowering the oppressed, even though it did not always lead to social and political change. In this day and age, there is more scope for Pentecostals to push into social and political engagement in a way that hasn't been seen in more explicit ways in its history. In this way, their spiritual power might also be used for social and political good. Thank you. Okay, so I think we're going to spend a few minutes, if we have them, to just have a little conversation about the theme of the conference, which is all about power and religion, and to see whether or not we think, and I know that there already are, different overlaps between our work and where we think there might be clear messages about the power of religion and if there are different pieces of research. So I'll just open it up now for anybody who would like to comment on this.
I think just listening to both of yours and thinking about mine as well, I think there was a clear theme of the empowerment of people in churches. This idea that is it happens at a local level, geographical local level, but it can also happen at a larger level, and how the power of church can liberate people locally, but actually nationally as well. So it's just has this massive scope of potential of liberation.
Yes. I was really interested, Anna, in what you was talking about, the idea of a good society, and when you were talking, I was thinking about in a way each of our pieces of work are exploring like the power of these different communities to contribute to a good society, to shape what a good society might be. And in ways, I also think, Eddie, that for the work you've done with Our Lady of Lourdes, it's really interesting because it contrasts with my research in that the church doesn't have the same freedoms to shape their wider society in the way that I have looked at with Pentecostals. And so it's amazing how I feel like the church that you've looked at has a very prophetic kind of power, because it's doing that really wonderful work of having lots of different people together. The priest is loving them, serving them, giving them a community that the country at large isn't providing for lots of different people, because it's not an open, tolerant place. And the church, like, it shines very brightly, it seems, in that kind of context, because it contrasts so much with what's happening in wider society. So I thought that was quite an important difference, actually, in that question of what kind of power do our churches have if they can't do the kind of work that we're saying is important in the UK context.
Absolutely, yeah.
I just want to add something about the participation of my topic to the freedom of the oppressed. Well, the Catholic Church in Turkey, first of all, is not recognized at all. So the survival of the small communities is key for the survival of the entire church. And the priest's work is an example of that. It is possible that if you work hard, if you put people together, you can achieve something. And the proof is that him being able to get a permission from the state to celebrate the Mass in an abandoned Orthodox cathedral, while other churches are being transformed to mosques. We are talking about the same country. And his work is so much appreciated that even the state authorities give them the opportunity to continue to what he's doing. Because what he's doing is honest and genuine, and he's doing it for the entire community, not just for the Christians. That's why I want to add.
It's really, really good.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a really good point about, I think sometimes some of the fear about religion in public life is that people who have faith only care about other people who have faith. And so there's a fear that religion is dividing groups of people and not caring for everybody. But actually, in what you just described there, and I think it's very true of many different faith groups in public life, is that there is a desire to help human beings of all faiths or no faith. And I think in the UK, we talk about faith-based, not faith-biased. So it's not that we're refusing to, or it's not that faith groups are refusing to care for people who are not of their own faith. They'll help anybody who's in need. So I think that's a really important point about how we understand the power of faith groups to positively serve those who are vulnerable. Yeah.
And one more point. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it.
Okay, so one more thing is that the people's main concern in Turkey is that the Catholic Church is not open to the Turks in general. And the priests, I wouldn't want to say they are rude, but it's a very close community. So what Father Ferron did was the opposite. He welcomed everyone. And the Turks who were just curious about Christianity went there, not to be part of the church. They were just curious. And they asked him questions and he just explained to them. So he welcomed everyone, while other churches, some of them even refused to open their doors to Muslims. So there was a big difference for him.
It's funny you say that, because I think it's on the local level, and it's very similar to like on the national level. So Selina, you were saying how some leaders are not invited to conversations, just like some like Catholics and some established leaders, other massive churches are not invited. And I think if churches want to continue to make an influence and shape society from the local level to the national level, especially with globalization, everything that we're living in the moment, they have to open the doors. They have to be open to conversation. They have to be open to say, let's together have a conversation what the good society is. Let's together decide this. Because if they do that, then we are also like, becomes more Christianity, and the opportunity for liberation and for other people becomes like accessible to everybody, not just to certain groups, but to anyone really.
Yeah. And I think it is that question of, I guess, politics and pragmatism and building power, and knowing when that's a priority, rather than thinking that there has to be agreement on every single thing to work with somebody else. So I think the question of collaboration is so important, and how religious groups can build power with people of other religions or no religion in a community or society for the sake of fighting for common and shared interests and trying to improve those things that are affecting the lives of the people they care about. And that's so important, that you actually, when the opportunity is there, that you don't remain in a sectarian cut off part where you're only focusing on very particular interests at the expense of what's going to be helpful for everybody.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Was there any more final comments?
I think I'm good.
Well, thank you both very much, and thank you to whoever has tuned into this panel. Obviously, we would have liked to be with you in reality in person, but thank you for tuning in. And please email us if you'd like to hear more or share with us your research as well. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Bye.